certainly. Anything in your environment can affect your dream. There are certain things that definitely affect a dream. If you go yachting, and you're on the front of a yacht, and you're pulling on the foresail, and you're coming about, and the yacht is pitching up and down, up and down, up and down for hours on end, you will get that in your dream. No arguments about it. And so there are certain things that each one of us is susceptible to in dreams. But if you keep a spiritual diary, then that is the best help. Let me tell you some things about a spiritual diary. The first thing is you can ask a question in your spiritual diary. It should be, the question should be written down the last moment before you go to sleep. Just put your question in the spiritual diary under a date and a time, ask the question, and then you watch for the waking response. The answer to your question may not come the first night or few nights, but it will come eventually, because we have enough research work on. Can you change? Can you turn it over? Thank you. There are two parts of the night that are sensitive to input for a dream. If something's going to affect your dream, it's going to happen in these two places. And they are called hypnagogia and hypnopompia. Hypnopompia is when you are coming out of a dream in the morning, when you're waking up, and hypnagogia is when you're going to sleep. And so hypnagogia, say for the 10 minutes before you fall asleep, you are susceptible to your visual images being changed. If, for instance, you have a dog barking in the garden, not your dog, a neighbor's dog barking, wow, wow, wow. It may well be that during the day you have had a friend by the name of Bob who has talked to you on the telephone or visited you, and as you're going off to sleep and you hear whoa, whoa, it could be that the whoa turns to Bob, Bob, Bob. So susceptible are we to changes of input. And so that is the time when you put a question. And no, let's do this. Here you are. I'm going to suggest you're sitting nicely, dozing in your easy chair, there, like that. Here is your sleep state. There's your sleep state. And this is when you come out of the sleep and you start to think. And all day long you are thinking, 12,000 thoughts a day. And you can take these and measure them on an electroencephalogram. And you are therefore encased in the sleep state and the thinking state. Except here, as you're going off to sleep, here, I better put it in a different color. As you are going off to sleep, you are susceptible to input. Something may come into this very sensitive area when you are generating images and may change the image. And that is called hypnagogia. But it's also the time that you can put a question in your diary. You can write a question in your diary, there it is, question, and you have your sleep, and then as you're coming out of your sleep, you are now in hypnopompia, not hypnagogia, but hypnopompia, meaning coming out of the sleep. You can you can pick up images of the elements of your dream and record them in your diary under answer, and any visual experiences, they don't have to be a dream is very useful, but it could be a visual experience, contains the symbols answering your dream, answering your question that you put before you went to sleep. Now, there have been research work done in which a selected group of people have been given objects to play with. And these objects played with can enter into the dream and signify all kinds of things. The equivalent of this in psychic work is the pack of cards known as the, what are they? Tarot cards. The tarot cards. If you are conversant with them, similarly with a packet of 52 playing cards, the Ace of Spades is regarded as the card, the death card, and the Queen of Hearts indicates romance, and so on. Crudely, in that sense, those can be inputs to dream. But if you are powerfully affected by what you eat, like cheese might tend to give you a different dream from something else. But those are well known, they're reasonably well known. It's much, much better, if you take my advice, that's what I'm here for, is to take on a system like the one I'm suggesting. Take on a system as a key to abstract thought and dreaming. I've got the young lady's horoscope here tonight, and I'm going to use it as an illustration for what I'm saying. Sometimes a dream can develop into a vision. What that means technically, esoteric technically, it means that the dream becomes pumped full of energy, a numinous energy, an energy that begins to fill your structure in the dream and the images or the elements that the dream is portraying. And they begin to crackle and sparkle and give off in subtle ways extraordinary amounts of energy. And usually the meaning of the dream, which has become a vision, becomes very important to you. And it's meant that you remember the experience for the rest of your days. I'm going to read a typical experience that happened to me. It was in my journal, and I put it under the heading of the ravings of a mystic. Partly because I was doing medicine at the time and didn't want people to think that I was going round the bend. But listen to this. It's totally beyond me when it occurred. This was something new for me, fabulous, incredible, an unknown capacity, latent everywhere, and showing that peculiar quality, faith, but in the most unusual way. It suddenly seemed as if I had direct contact with the central motivating power of life. And by applying my powers of visualization, I was able to give what was visualized a life, a meaning, a function. And the certainty or faith with which I created this, for suddenly I was a creator, a son of God, was with him and him, confident, sure, right, detached, and yet all entering. It may never happen again, and yet it could, should, must, will happen again, for it is a capacity which expresses all the hidden, latent, non-manifested, aborted attempts at visualization and full consciousness. Many factors might have had to be present or absent for this to have been possible. It surprised even you. That was the Master Robert Browning at the time. It was as if I was in a cylinder, the center of a column rising ever upwards, and all the time I was making it a pillar of light, and it incorporated a billion details and tributes to all I have learnt in all my lives. It was a Giotto's tower turned inside out, and with all its detail multiplied 1,000,000 times, and ever changing with facets of the innumerable manifestations of life. And I, knowing myself to be immortally, indestructibly part of the Creator, though yet a miserable expression of him, was the life within the tower, was the tower, and the builder of it as it rose higher and higher and stood out on its plane, whichever that was, like a beacon, a tribute to the energies which you and others have invested in me, and it was my creation. What can you say when a thing like that happens to you, where you are lifted totally out of your surroundings and given a glimpse of being a creator of form, of shape, of energy, and it came out of a dream? And for many of us, especially Westerners, the dream is just about the only vehicle that can change into a vision. If you practice yoga, if you meditate regularly, well, then you have other openings into the field of vision. Now I want to read you an experience that happened in very mundane, ordinary circumstances. I had been reading the Dead Sea Scrolls. I had been reading about Qumran, the community of, I've forgotten the word for the moment, the community of men who on the banks of the Dead Sea had translated and done all sorts of wonderful works, and where Jesus, who was a guerrilla fighter at that stage, sometimes sheltered. He was eventually caught by the Romans and thrashed regularly. They would come round and apply their dominance. And one of the ways was to thrash certain individuals who had been found to be guerrillas in the past. It was on the 20th of April, 1997, that I had a vision of Jesus at 10 a.m. in the morning, and I was sitting in front of my Volvo heading for Bristol, the Bristol lecture on that day, at the Theosophical Society Lodge, with Alan Boxhall driving, and Joe as a passenger, this Joe here, as a passenger in the rear. This was the vision that I had. Jesus lying flat, face down, naked to the waist, looking up at me with the right side of his face uppermost, slightly bearded, with dark hair tinged with red. He was in an exhausted state. He had just been thrashed by the Romans. He had been, in an exhausted state, but was able to mouth to me the words, "Don't tell my mother." He had been badly beaten and left in that position by the Roman Gauleiters. outside and left outside the village of Qumran, which he sometimes used as his headquarters for guerrilla activities. The scene is taken by me to be some months before his death in AD 69. This episode occurred during what I now know to be dhyana, where pratyahara has been attained, and a visual scene, scenario, is acted out in a live drama sequence. I played out a negative role in this scenario as the evangelist John, being used at the time by his higher self. The Christ is, as is so at the time, by his higher self, the Christ, as is so at the time this is being written. The meaning, the affect of this extraordinary vision, not sought for, out of the blue, driving in a car. I'm in the front seat next to the driver, Joe's in the back seat, Alan Boxall is driving, and here I have this extraordinary vision of Jesus naked with his back lacerated and his head looking up at me, and I'm aware that I'm somehow using this vehicle just for this event, and he doesn't want me to let his mother, whom I know, Mary, to know that he has been badly smashed up by the Romans. He wants time to recover. Came out of a dream, in a car. Nothing could be more mundane than that. And when you see the face, you know that this was or is a historical representation of Jesus. Jesus acting out the role of a guerrilla leader amongst the peoples on the border of the Red Sea. Would anybody like to ask questions about that? Now you see, that sort of thing, that sort of dream vision, which was filled with energy and had to be because it was representing something that had happened 2,000 years ago. See how difficult it is to present the subject of dreams and visions. When you have a historical experience, just a fragment from a person's life. Probably because the man was in agony. And wherever there is agony and sorrow, you will get the likelihood of phenomena occurring. Somehow agony and sorrow generates that kind of atmos in which ectoplasm, if it's present, can mix and manifestations occur. Any questions about that?
Were you asleep? That was a waking vision in the car in the Volvo.
What was that?
You weren't asleep. That was a...
I was dozing, as you would if you were on a long drive. Just dozing, and then this thing happened. And it's vivid. I can see it now, vivid. And always remember with a dream, it's not just the visual aspect, it's the affect, the emotion, the feeling, that is being projected by the dream that is often much more important than the visual.
Do you think it's possible that in dreams time is completely different?
Yes, yes. I've known in this sort of state and things less than this, in which the hands of the clock can almost spin. You can lose an hour quite easily in these states. Or on other occasions, time can drag. There's no doubt about it, as I have taught with the opening of the third eye, that when you have a superconscious experience, there's ecstasy, which you spelt wrong. Just to show you, I read it, you see. Ecstasy, you have ecstasy, and you have omnipotence, a tremendous sense of ecstasy accompanying omniscience, being all-knowing, knowing, understanding, comprehending everything. Omniscience, ecstasy, and omnipotence. Omnipotence, the sense of all power. And with this comes the extraordinary feeling that you're about to have the capacity to handle time. And I've always said that time is the hardest thing of all to master. I have experiences nowadays in which periods, certainly at night, can pass in a matter of minutes, seconds. Hours can pass in seconds. But control of it is a different matter. You know, the tendency of humanity is to try and make something ecstatic last forever. But we would soon jumble up the laws of the universe if we just resorted to that. Every time we had a pleasurable experience, make it last as long as you can. I remember the first occasion that this happened to me. I was a little boy of 3, and a lady by the name of Mrs. Bruce, from the Bruce family that used to play golf in South Africa, took me for a walk across an aerodrome, Durban aerodrome. And this walk seemed to me, a little boy, never to end. It went on and on and on and on. And the space between each telegraph pole seemed interminable to me. And that stuck in my mind. And I used to write short stories about what would happen if you were conscious, awake, and all your senses were cut off. That was to be answered later, much, much later, of course, when the float tank was invented and all the senses are cut off in the float tank. You can't see anything, you can't hear anything, you can't taste anything, and you're floating in warm oil so you don't feel anything. And the effect of this was that consciousness left the body. And so I suppose I was a lucky little boy then, in that I never solved that mystery on the aerodrome. Otherwise my consciousness would have left the body on a hot summer's day in precarious circumstances. Questions so far? You notice we are now in the realm of vision, where extraordinary revelation can occur and massive amounts of energy can flow through you. And things like time and light. Light is associated also with omniscience, of illumination, light, illumination, omniscience, and the extraordinary experiences that you can have with omniscience. For me, omniscience is proved when you experience in your ecstasy a light 10,000 times brighter than the brightest sun. Now that's hard to imagine, but believe me, in the highest moments of superconsciousness, that is available to man. A light brighter than the brightest of 10,000 suns merged. Well, I'm going to press on. People often ask, what's the matter with me? I don't dream. I don't dream. Is it that I can't dream? And I always have to say, no, it's more likely that you don't remember your dreams. But a person who goes, a highly intelligent person, a doctor friend of mine, Dr. Datlai, a Hindu doctor, she has this problem. And she goes right out in sleep and never dreams. And she's heard people in our field talk about dreams and wondered why it was. My investigation shows two things relevant to this factor. And it's worth noting if you're going to be a psychologist. Firstly, that people who make many, many decisions each day are people who tend to have a very shallow, unlikely, parlous dream life. Nothing much in the dream life at all. Usually nothing. And that's because somehow or the other decision-making, especially doctors, who have to examine a patient or take a case history, and everything the patient says or every reaction the patient gives, she has to note it in her consciousness and decide, is that related to this condition or that condition? And then finally to come to a diagnosis and then a prognosis requires constant call on certain parts of the brain, memory banks especially, and if they don't recharge them in some way, it tends to reflect in the dream life. Today, now, I would say that possibly that this person anyway, being a very mental person, probably has access to globe G, and which is a parallel globe, and probably explains why she has other experiences instead of dreams. People have also asked whether powerful dreams can be deleterious to the action of the heart. And if you're a person taking the path seriously, as I have done, taking the path seriously, certain things will tend to exert themselves on your awareness. One of the things I found was that through long periods in which I was involved in mental work, studies, research, I found that my heart would speed up in the middle of the night and go at a terrific pace and do this for, say, 10 minutes. No pain involved, for 10 minutes. And then it would slow down again. And the Master Robert Browning, who was working on me at the time, showed me that this was deliberate, that in people who are engaged in esoteric work need exercise, and quite often they can't get it, and so there is a deliberate interference which speeded the heart up, so that it was as if you were having exercise, and the heart was given 10 minutes, say, every third or fourth day. But it is true also to say that people who suffer from angina that is pain in the heart muscle, that it can be dangerous for them. And so they need to see a doctor who would give them an appropriate drug which would see that during the night anyway, the heart would not be speeded up to such an extent that angina, which is shortage of oxygen in the heart muscle, would occur. Any questions on this particular subject? I'm going to talk about a certain person who came to one or two of the seminars more than 2 years ago. This lady had a history of manic depression. She was a businesswoman. She was from a foreign country. She was a mother of 2. And she was having psychotic experiences. Now, by psychotic, we mean unreal. She was having experiences that were not true to life. They were experiences which she thought were true, were valid, but in actual fact they were not. And she occasionally knew they were not, but they went on occurring. She would have out-of-body experiences, not profound ones in which she was unaware of her physical body and her surroundings, but light out-of-body experiences in which she said she would be visited by a person known to her who would proceed to have intercourse with her. And despite the closest of questioning, repeated questioning, on different occasions, she was totally convinced that this person came to her house and engaged her in this coitus. I considered the case very carefully and came to the conclusion that she probably had an imbalance of her hormones, and that the hormones were sexually adjusted, and that this was causing her to have these visualized sexual attacks. She had come to me because she knew I wouldn't laugh at her or wouldn't scorn her. She had had some rough handling from orthodox medical people, and so my advice to her was to have a hysterectomy. She had a third-ray physical body, and third-ray physical bodies do well with a hysterectomy, whereas some ray physical bodies don't do very well with it. She had the hysterectomy, and the whole phenomenon stopped immediately. And so the point I'm making here is that out-of-body experiences may indicate psychosis, and the psychosis may indicate some condition in the physical body that has gone awry. And it's always, all right, 9 times out of 10, it is likely to be a female condition. The fact that the hysterectomy stopped the whole process indicated that the hormonal imbalances in her body were playing upon the mental and emotional more than anything, emotional factors in her life. And so if you do ever have people dreaming excessively and having out-of-body experiences which indicate psychosis, they need to see a doctor and get properly, specifically examined. in case there is something like what I've just said to you. Any questions?
Well,
yes.
Being a woman myself, I find it a little bit drastic to suggest a hysterectomy if she had that sort of things, because you have your hormones from your...
But don't forget, I did say she had 2 children.
Yeah, but that doesn't do any difference, you know.
Oh, it has a lot to do with whether you prescribe a hysterectomy or not. If the lady has had children, she isn't going to need the organs, is she?
Well, yes, I don't agree with that, you know.
But what is it you don't agree?
With just chopping off your womb like that. I mean, if you...
No, she had had treatment for 10 years.
For 10 years. For what?
Orthodox, I don't know, they were orthodox treatments. She came to me because she was desperate. Joe, you remember the incident?
Yeah, I think what you didn't say, which might have clarified it, was that she was having problems with her uterus.
Oh, well, that's
So,
not a thing if she has fibroids or if
That's
anything
right.
like that, yeah.
Well, the suggestion was fibroid.
Yeah.
Mm. But it sounds quite drastic because she had this sort of visions that you suggest to have hysterectomy.
Well, perhaps it'll turn out eventually that that there is a profound influence on the female psyche through hormones that are at war with each other.
Yeah.
And which would you rather have, a woman who has had her children and she is near to lunacy, if you like to put it like that, and decides that she'll have the hysterectomy and the lunacy goes.
Well, I don't know if it's a coincidence that it goes, but I'm not convinced. I'm working in women's health myself, and I find it a little bit offending, you know, to suggest that...
I don't blame you.
No. I mean, if she has fibroids and if she has excess bleeding and things like
She
that...
was having problems.
Yeah, then I can understand it.
Well, it could have been anything, you see, producing images like that in her behavior. She was psychotic.
Anyway, that's beside it.
Yes, beside the point. What would you have done as an expert?
Well, I would have tried...
You would have put her for more examination.
No, not at all. If she had fibroids, which it didn't come out...
No, I'm not accepting that she had fibroids because it would have to be proved. I was dealing with her as a psychologist.
Yeah.
Now, what would you have done?
I would have given her some Bowen treatment.
Some what?
Bowen treatment.
What's that?
That's alternative therapy. This
No.
affects the nervous system, so I'll try that.
Sorry, what kind of therapy is that?
Bowen.
How do you spell that?
B-O-W-E-N.
And what is that?
Well, what is that? It's
Sounds like the royal family to me.
What would be some of your criteria to determine the difference in an out-of-body experience that is psychotic and one that's valid or
Yes.
beneficial?
Don has asked, what would I look for if there was out-of-body experience that was psychotic, abnormal if you like, and between that and the normal. Well, the most difficult of all abnormalities with out-of-body experience is when the person can't stop it and they leave their bodies. And that is very, very closely aligned to schizophrenia, where a person carrying perhaps a schizophrenic gene or something is susceptible to schizophrenia, a bit of paranoia and so on, and undergoes a crisis in the life somehow, business, work, illness, tragedy. And in the crisis, they, rather than face the crisis that they're in, the situation that they're in, they will tend to slip into another attitude, persona, a personality that is more acceptable to them. And that, of course, is what I say, schizophrenia, whereas it's usually very difficult for the average person to come out of the body. They need to have a technique, a process which they undertake, like becoming conscious in the dream state, and in those circumstances, OBE, out-of-body experiences, pose no threat at all to the sanity of the individual. It does mean, though, that one should be very careful about out-of-body experience and never encourage a person who has a history of mental disorders or illness to play around with anything occult. Even meditation can be dangerous for people who are mentally unstable. So that, I'm going to sum that up with just the main one. The danger is that they slip out of alignment when they don't want it and wouldn't notice it even, and then they would drift off into states of consciousness that are more acceptable to them but which are unreal. This young man over here would like to ask a question.
No, I was just very surprised.
Can you speak up a bit? I'm hard of hearing.
When you spoke about links, or giving a woman a hysterectomy because she
Yes.
was diagnosed with manic depression, you said. So I just find that extremely odd. So what would you say about a man with manic depression? He hasn't got a womb, so you think
He's
that's
born,
caused by
yeah.
some hormone problems?
And I wouldn't prescribe hysterectomy for manic depression, certainly not. But this person had had experiences that were psychotic, and they were sexual. And she had had her married life, and perhaps the most unfortunate thing, which I didn't mention, was that she welcomed the experiences.
I worked for TV, making documentaries at the time, and I had a very unpleasant experience where I went into a sort of psychotic state for about 2 weeks, didn't sleep, lost a lot of weight, and subsequently I was told by a Ghanaian journalist that this was a political film about a man who was ruling, who had seized power in the country, and I was told that opposition politicians had paid a self-styled prophetess to put the hooch on us or do something anyway to make me. I mean, the film never got made, and I was absolutely petrified afterwards that this could have happened. So I'm just saying this is something very strange where someone else. Nobody said to me, "We've put."
But what is the question?
But what do you think? I mean, how is it possible that someone else can affect someone in such a way?
You mean in healing?
No, not in healing, because
In hexing, in hexing.
Oh, hexing then. You know,
Putting
It's-
a hex on somebody.
DV, it sounds like Tagati.
Well, I'm talking about that.
I thought I was going mad. I thought that, in fact, I want to see it.
Yeah. The Zulus call it Tagati.
I thought I'd gone. Or I didn't know what. Was it schizophrenic?
You've seen hypnotism work?
No.
You haven't?
No, not really.
Hypnotists can do the same thing. They can affect a person so the person will believe anything and see anything. And that's all that Tagati is. They build up a situation of great crisis and warning and threatening, and things tend to go that way. Not everybody is susceptible to Tagati or to influencing or even to hypnotism. I was in a group, an army group in the war in Malta, where there were 40 people, and of the 40, 5 or 6 of them could be hypnotized and affected, and no power on earth could affect the others. I'm not versed in it, I'm afraid.
In my life experience, I have encountered different ways in which dreams can be interpreted.
You're going to ask me a question, aren't you?
Right. Is it your orientation regarding dreams to interpret a dream literally, not symbolically?
Are you asking me that question?
Yes.
Is it possible to interpret a dream literally
And not symbolically?
and not symbolically? Yes, I should think that is possible. I should think that a dream for some people can be a literal meaning, but with the wisdom of many years, I would say that person would be better off not being guided by dreams, literally.
Does that include prophetic dreams?
Prophetic? I've been talking about prophetic dreams all night. You mean what's going to win the 3:30 on Saturday? I know what you mean. You can take it to absurd limits. Some dreams are prophetic. Much of the content of what I've spoken of tonight has been from the unconscious, where knowledge of parallel universes exists somewhere in the unconscious, because the unconscious has existed for countless millions of years, much longer than man on this planet has. And yes, I think some people can have a dream of a tidal wave, and it can indicate to them that it's going to rain and there's going to be floods. But another person could have the same dream, and it could represent that there's going to be a great argument in which people are going to have to be tumbled around by the breaking of this argumentative wave. You must study your own dream symbology. And if you're going to go into the reading of dreams and others, I would suggest you found a system for doing it. And this is the only one I can recommend. One more question.
You've more or less outlined the astrological houses.
Yes.
And how you define. Do you then apply this to the natal horoscope? So if I have a dream, I don't know.
You don't want an astrological course in a nutshell, do you?
No, I just want to understand the basics of how this applies to dream interpretation.
If I am given somebody's horoscope and they tell me a vivid dream, I will automatically look in the 4th house if they're talking about their family. If they are talking about money, I will look in the 2nd house. And sure enough, my experience tells me that through the years, that what a person's dreaming has got a semblance of it in the horoscope, and by reading the horoscope you can understand the dream. Nobody's got anything on dreams. It's a region which has hardly been explored by science, simply because science can't make head nor tail of it. And so I think the astrological interpretation is very important indeed.